but our questioning would have been grounded in advancing and overseeing the FBI's dual missions of enforcing federal laws and countering national security threats on American soil. In short, despite our disagreements, we would have done our duty as members of the Judiciary Committee. Today, unfortunately, House Republicans will fall well short of that mark. For them, this hearing is little more than performance art. It is an elaborate show designed with only two purposes in mind: to protect Donald Trump from the consequences of his actions and to return him to the White House in the next election. Don't take my word for it. Chairman Jordan announced his plan last August, just days after the FBI searched Mar-a-Lago. He told an audience at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, that the investigation into Trump's wrongdoing was designed to, quote, help frame up the 2024 race when I hope and I think President Trump is going to run again, and we need to make sure that he wins. Let me repeat that. We need to make sure that he wins. In pursuit of this goal, Chairman Jordan and committee Republicans have claimed for months that the FBI is corrupt, rotten, politicized, and their favorite word, weaponized against the American people. Chairman Jordan has launched an array of baseless investigations into the FBI, most premised on absurd conspiracy theories, some so absurd that the chairman cannot possibly believe them to be true. But this is where the extreme MAGA leadership of this Congress has brought us today. Today, House Republicans will attack the FBI for having had the audacity to treat Donald Trump like any other citizen. The strategy is simple, really. When in doubt, Chairman Jordan investigates the investigators. The FBI dared to hold Trump accountable, so Republicans must discredit the FBI at all costs. You will hear claims today that the FBI's decision to investigate Donald Trump was somehow unfair. You will hear the Republicans attack the indictment of former President Trump on 37 counts related to his gross mishandling of national security information, including information regarding defense and weapons capabilities of both the United States and foreign countries, United States nuclear programs, potential vulnerabilities of the United States and its allies to military attack, and plans for possible retaliation in response to a foreign attack. The facts are made clear in the indictment. Quote, the unauthorized disclosure of these classified documents could put at risk the national security of the United States, foreign relations, the safety of the United States military, and human sources, and the continued viability of sensitive intelligence collection methods, close quote. Indeed, the indictment goes on to describe how the former president made such unauthorized disclosures, with him boasting about and showing his classified documents to numerous individuals without proper security clearance. You will hear claims today that this indictment against Trump was unfair, maybe even that it was unlawful. You'll hear that the FBI should have just asked Trump a little more nicely, one more time, to hand over the documents. You'll hear that the case was a political investigation from the start, orchestrated by a liberal-loving FBI that ensured Trump would be wrongfully vilified at every turn. These claims, of course, are completely untethered from the evidence. Even if you believe, as Chairman Jordan claims, that President Trump has committed no crime, surely we can agree that it is dangerous and profoundly irresponsible to have taken these documents from the White House and left them unsecured in Mar-a-Lago. Again, don't take just my word for it. Trump's Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, said that the former president's handling of this information put U.S. service members' lives and their national security at risk. And Trump's handpicked Attorney General Bill Barr, with whom I agree on very little, hit the nail on the head when he described the former president's legal troubles as, quote, entirely of his own making. He had no right to those documents. The government tried for over a year quietly and with respect to get them back, and he jerked them around. When he faced a subpoena, he didn't raise any legal arguments. He engaged in a course of deceitful conduct. That was a clear crime if those allegations are true, close quote. The former president could have, at any time, for months, simply returned the documents and avoided prosecution. But House Republicans do not want to talk about any of that. They seem incapable of assigning any agency or responsibility to Donald Trump for problems that are Trump's and Trump's alone. You might hear today about a man named Stephen D'Antuono, the former special agent in charge of the Washington field office during the investigation into the documents. Last month, Committee Republicans brought him in for an interview, and shortly after that, Chairman Jordan released a letter purporting to describe Mr. D'Antuono's testimony. In fact, Chairman Jordan's summary of Mr. D'Antuono's words are a vast mischaracterization of what he actually said. Here's just one example. Chairman Jordan has claimed that Mr. D'Antuono said he had, quote, no idea, unquote, why the Mar-a-Lago investigation was run out of the FBI's Washington field office instead of the Miami field office. What the chairman hides is that just seconds later, Mr. D'Antuono explained that, quote, the venue was here, meaning Washington, D.C., for the classified documents, that it was, quote, not out of the ordinary for Washington to be lead office running the investigation, and said that Washington has, quote, most experience and knowledge in working public corruption cases and are, quote, the experts in classified document investigations. Mr. Jordan did not share the full record with the American public because it does not fit his chosen narrative. My staff has worked to have a minimally redacted version of Mr. D'Antuono's full testimony released, and I urge you to read the words for yourself in their entirety. When you compare his actual words to Mr. Jordan's characterization, you'll understand why I feel like this hearing room has become a theater. And frankly, that goes for many things that we will hear from the Republicans today. You can expect to hear that the FBI is retaliating against its conservative employees and has a deep-seated conspiracy to support liberal candidates and ideology. These claims are based on the words of several individuals, people Republicans are somewhat laughably calling whistleblowers. In fact, evidence shows that these individuals were suspended for violating serious FBI policies. One provided an unauthorized interview to Russian state-owned media. Another leaked information about an ongoing investigation, placing FBI agents and witnesses at risk. And another said that he wanted to use a senior FBI official as, quote, target practice. Chairman Jordan invited some of these so-called whistleblowers to testify before the Weaponization Subcommittee in May. As it turns out, two of the witnesses were ultimately paid $250,000 each for their testimony, money raised in part by former Trump aide Kash Patel and paid via a check whose memo line reads, quote, for holding the line. And yet Republicans today will try to claim that it is the FBI and not these witnesses who are somehow corrupt. Republicans today will also attack President Biden, starting with the IRS investigation into Hunter Biden. They will ignore the fact that U.S. Attorney David Weiss had the authority to bring charges in any district he saw fit and was able to operate fully free of interference. They do not want to acknowledge that despite years of investigations, President Biden has not been found to have engaged in any wrongdoing. Instead, they'll try to convince you that Hunter Biden would have been charged with far more serious crimes had it not been for U.S. Attorney Weiss being blocked by the Biden political machine. Once again, when they do not like the outcome, they investigate the investigators and work to discredit the outcome. And Republicans will make false claims about the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force, claiming that it is somehow censoring conservatives. In fact, the task force plays a key role in making sure that Russia, China, Iran, and other foreign entities cannot again interfere in our elections. According to committee Republicans, the task force's efforts to track and prevent foreign influence operations amount to attacks on conservative speech, a nonsensical claim considering that the Foreign Influence Task Force has nothing to do with censoring American free speech and, in fact, helps to ensure that American voices are heard by stopping Russian troll farms. Make no mistake, in making these claims, Republicans have all but rolled out the red carpet and begged Russia to once again interfere in our elections because they believe that doing so will get Trump reelected in 2024. And that is the goal of Republicans today. Republican claims that the FBI has been weaponized, their personal attacks on Director Wray, their repeated calls to, quote, to defund the FBI, these are not victimless acts. They are a clarion call to anti-government extremists, and that call is being heard. Last year, Director Wray faced multiple credible death threats. FBI employees faced more threats in the months after the Mar-a-Lago search than they had in the entire prior year. The problem has gotten so bad that FBI has had to stand up an entire new unit dedicated to combating threats to FBI agents and staff. It is far past time that Republicans realize the consequences of their actions. Republicans may want to downplay Trump's behavior and blame the FBI for his downfall. But no matter what they say, Trump risked the safety and security of the United States to remove those documents from the White House, then lied to the government instead of returning them. Donald Trump must be held accountable, and attempts to shield him from the consequences of his own actions are both transparent and despicable. Ultimately, no matter how many times Republicans attack Director Wray, or the FBI, or the investigation at Mar-a-Lago, I trust in the rule of law. Mr. Trump will have his day in court. I believe the system will hold him accountable. And I thank the men and women of the FBI who helped bring the classified information to safety and protect the national security of our nation. Thank you for being here today, Director Wray. I hope your agents will not be disheartened by what they hear today and will continue this kind.
Members of the committee, in the time that I have before we get to your questions, I want to talk about the sheer breadth and impact of the work the FBI's 38,000 employees are doing each and every day, because the work the men and women of the FBI do to protect the American people goes way beyond the one or two investigations that seem to capture all the headlines. Take violent crime. Last year alone, working shoulder to shoulder with our partners in state and local law enforcement, the FBI arrested more than 20,000 violent criminals and child predators. That's an average of almost 60 bad guys taken off the streets per day, every day. Or our work going after the cartels, exploiting our southwest border to traffic fentanyl and other dangerous drugs into communities nationwide. The FBI's running well over 300 investigations targeting the leadership of those cartels. And working with our partners, we've already seized hundreds of kilograms of fentanyl this year alone, stopping deadly drugs from reaching their intended destinations in states all over the country and saving countless American lives. Or the thousands of active investigations we now have into the Chinese government's efforts to steal our most precious secrets, rob our businesses of their ideas and innovation, and repress freedom of speech right here in the United States. And that is just scratching the surface. The men and women of the FBI work tirelessly every day to protect the American people from what is really a staggering array of threats. And we don't do that work alone. The FBI now leads more than 750 task forces nationwide, made up of more than 6,000 state and local task force officers, or TFOs as we call them, from more than 1,800 different state and local agencies. Each of those TFOs represents an officer, a deputy, or an investigator that a local police chief, sheriff, or state superintendent was willing to send our way, certainly not because they didn't have enough work to do in their own department, but because they saw the tremendous value that our FBI-led task forces bring. And we are honored and humbled by their trust in us and grateful for their partnership. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. To truly appreciate the impact the FBI and our partners are having, you got to look at the cases. Just last month, for instance, the FBI charged 31 members of 2 drug trafficking organizations responsible for distributing dangerous drugs like fentanyl, cocaine, and methamphetamine throughout the area around Marion, Ohio. In that one investigation run out of the FBI's 2-man office in Mansfield, we worked with partners from multiple local police departments and sheriff's offices to take kilos of fentanyl off Marion streets. Enough lethal doses, I should add, to kill the entire population of Columbus, Cleveland, and Cincinnati combined. It's a great example of how even a small office with a small personnel footprint, the FBI is working big cases hand in hand with our state and local partners to have an outsized impact in our communities. The FBI's got thousands of employees working scores of investigations like that all over the country to protect the American people. Those men and women who choose to dedicate their careers, their lives really, to this kind of work and fulfilling the FBI mission are inspiring. At a time when so many other law enforcement agencies have had a difficult time with recruiting and retention, the Bureau continues to attract applicants in near record numbers. In fact, after the first couple of years of my tenure, the number of Americans applying to be special agents tripled the pace from when I started, reaching the highest levels in about a decade. At the same time, inside the FBI, our special agent attrition has remained in the low single digits and would be the envy of almost any employer. And even with these bigger numbers, the folks we're continuing to add continue to be top-notch. The percentage of both veterans and special agent hires with prior law enforcement experience has remained as steady as ever, between 25 and 30%. Add to that, in a job market where applicants have a whole lot of other opportunities, the percentage of those new agent trainees that also have advanced degrees is up and now approaches about 50% of every class at Quantico. But the thing that unites them all is a commitment to public service, a willingness to put others above themselves. And that is true from the bottom of the organization to the top. Since becoming director, I have worked hard to assemble and cultivate a leadership team that embodies those values and characteristics. It's a team that I purposefully chose because they walked the walk out in the field. Just taking our top 8 leaders as an example, they all came up through the Bureau as line agents. They've worked in 21 different field offices and have a combined 130 years of field experience. They include a West Point grad, veterans of the Army, Air Force, and Marines, as well as a former police officer and state trooper. And not a single one is a political appointee, not one. Today's FBI leaders reflect the best of our organization, an organization that is made up of 38,000 men and women who are patriots, professionals, and dedicated public servants. And that is the real FBI. I've now visited every single one of our 56 field offices twice, some of them more than twice. I speak constantly with local chiefs and sheriffs from all 50 states who work closely with us every day, with judges coast to coast who see and hear our work up close, with business leaders who turn to us for help with cyber attacks and Chinese economic espionage, with victims and their families, people that we protect from gangs and predators. And the FBI they tell me about consistently, almost resoundingly, is the same FBI that I see, an FBI that is respected, appreciated, trusted, and that is there for them when they need us the most. And that is the FBI that inspires me and that I'm proud to be here today to represent. Thank you.
We thank you. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, this is no time to mince words. The American people have lost faith in the FBI. All of our constituents are demanding that we get this situation under control, and we have to do that. That's our responsibility. This is not a political party issue, sir. This is about whether the very system of justice in our country can be trusted anymore. Without that, no republic can survive. See, the American people that we represent are losing count of the scandals that are mounting. The FBI has been involved. They've seen evidence that it's being used as a political tool of the Biden administration. They've seen counterterrorism resources being used against school parents, the homes of conservative political opponents being raided. They've seen conservative states being targeted over their election integrity laws, and conservative Catholics and pro-life citizens characterized as violent extremists. Just last month, as you know, former Special Counsel John Durham sat right in that seat and testified that the Justice Department and the FBI should never have launched the bogus Trump-Russia investigation. And his lengthy report reluctantly concluded that the FBI, quote, failed to uphold its mission of strict fidelity to the law. Just last week, NBC had a poll. Only 37% of registered voters now view the FBI positively. 35% have a negative view. In 2018, by comparison, 52% of the country had a positive view of the FBI. There's a serious decline in the people's faith, and it's on your watch, sir. And then, July 4th, we had this explosive 155-page opinion from a federal court in my home state of Louisiana. It explains in detail that the FBI has been directly involved in what the court says is, quote, arguably the most massive attack against free speech in United States history. The court ordered the White House, DOJ, and FBI, among others, to immediately cease colluding with and coercing social media companies to suppress American speech, of course, conservative speech in particular. Director Wray, I find it stunning. You made no mention of this court opinion either in your opening statement today or in this lengthy 14-page report that you prepared on July 12th, which is 8 days after the court ruling. Have you read the ruling, sir?
I am familiar with the ruling, and I've reviewed it with our Office of General Counsel.
Are you deeply disturbed by what they've told you about the ruling if you haven't read it yourself?
Obviously, we're going to comply with the court's order, the court's preliminary injunction. We sent out guidance to the field and the headquarters about how to do that. Needless to say, the injunction itself is a subject of ongoing litigation, and so I'll decline to comment further on
Well, let me tell you what the court concluded, because it should be the first thing you think about every morning and the last thing you think about at night. They said that, quote, the court found, apparently the FBI engaged in a massive effort to suppress disfavored conservative speech and blatantly ignored the First Amendment's right to free speech. The evidence shows the FBI threatened adverse consequences to social media companies that they did not comply with its censorship request. The court found that, quote, this seemingly unrelenting pressure by the FBI and the other defendants had the intended result of suppressing millions of protected free speech postings by American citizens. As a result, the court states, for example, millions of citizens did not hear about the Hunter Biden laptop story prior to the November 3rd, 2020 election. Page 4 of the court ruling lists some of the important subjects that the Biden administration and the FBI forced the social media platforms to suppress. The evidence shows you, your agency, the people that directly report to you, suppressed conservative-leaning free speech about topics like the laptop, the lab leak theory of COVID-19's origin, the effectiveness of masks and COVID-19 lockdowns and vaccines, speech about election integrity in the 2020 presidential election, security of voting by mail, even parody about the president himself, negative posts about the economy. The FBI made the social media platforms pull that information off the internet if it came from conservative sources. They did this under the guise that it was disinformation. Can you define what disinformation is?
What I can tell you is that our focus is not on disinformation, broadly speaking.
Well, wait a minute. Yes, it is. Wait a minute.
Can I answer the question?
You can in a minute. Your star witness said in the litigation, Elvis Chan, who's in charge of this, said they do it on the basis of disinformation. We need a definition of what that is.
Our focus is on malign foreign disinformation, that is, foreign hostile actors who engage in covert efforts to abuse our social media platforms, which is something that is not seriously in dispute.
I have to stop you for time. That's not accurate. You need to read this court opinion because you're in charge of enforcing it. The court has found that, and Elvis Chan testified under oath in charge of this for you. He said 50%. He had a 50% success rate in having alleged election disinformation taken down or censored. That wasn't just foreign adversaries, sir. That was American citizens. How do you answer for that?
Well, first off, I'm not sure that's a correct characterization.
Comes right out of the opinion. You should read it.
Of his testimony. But what I would say is the FBI is not in the business of moderating content or causing any social media company to suppress or censor.
That is not what the court has found.
What I would also say is among the things that you listed off, I find ironic the reference to the lab leak theory. The idea that the FBI would somehow be involved in suppressing references to the lab leak theory is somewhat absurd when you consider the fact that the FBI was the only agency in the entire intelligence community to reach the assessment that it was more likely than not that that was the explanation for the pandemic.
Your agents pulled it off the internet, sir. That's what the evidence in the court has found.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Director Wray, House Republicans have attacked the execution of the search warrant of Mar-a-Lago last August as a, quote, unprecedented raid. Would you consider the execution of the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago a raid?
I would not call it a raid. I would call it the execution of a lawful search warrant.
Can you describe how the search was executed?
Well, we had the case team, follow its standard procedure. It has sometimes been described as a SWAT operation. It was not. There was no SWAT involvement. But beyond that, I think I want to be really careful with getting too far into the details now that this case is not only in the hands of a special counsel, but more importantly, in my view, in front of the court. And I learned a long time ago as a line prosecutor and defense lawyer to respect the court process is where I think
Were,
we should
were
speak.
particular steps taken to ensure that the execution of the search warrant did not draw undue attention?
I think there were steps along those lines, yes, sir.
Can you name a couple of them?
Well, among other things, we did not have people coming in so-called raid jackets, which is often something you would see.
So in other words, the FBI agents executing the search wore plain clothes so as not to attract undue attention. And the FBI waited until Trump had left Mar-a-Lago to execute the search. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Chairman Jordan has attacked the DOJ and the FBI for not attempting to get the documents back from Trump consensually before turning to a search warrant. I want to walk through all the opportunities Trump had to produce these documents and have a series of yes or no questions. The National Archives, also known as NARA, first asked Trump to return all presidential records to them in May 2021, correct?
Well, I don't remember the date, but I remember there was a request by the National Archives.
And then throughout 2021, NARA made repeated follow-up requests, but still Trump replied to comply, correct?
Yes, I would refer you to the pleadings that have been filed in court that lay out in better detail than I could hear.
In fact, it was not until January 2022, after NARA warned Trump that failing to return documents could violate the Presidential Records Act, that Trump finally produced 15 boxes of documents to it, correct?
Again, I would just refer to our court filings, which go into great detail about all this.
And even these 15 boxes did not contain all the documents Trump was required to return, correct?
That's my recollection, but again, I'll refer
So in
to
May
filings.
2022, a grand jury had to actually subpoena Trump for the missing documents, correct?
Same answer.
And Trump was then present on June 3rd when his attorneys handed over another folder of documents and a certification that all classified material had been returned, correct?
Again, I just want to stick with what's in the court filings. That sounds right to me, but I really want to be careful to stay within the four corners.
But the certification was false, right? Even then, Trump had not returned all classified material, correct?
I think that is part of the indictment.
He had additional documents hiding in his bathroom, in his storage room, in his storage units, etc., yes?
Again, I think that's part of the indictment.
And so finally, DOJ and FBI were required to obtain a search warrant to obtain the classified documents that had not been retained, correct?
Same answer.
The documents retrieved during that search included 69 marked confidential, 98 secret, and 30 top secret. Is that correct?
Same answer.
So to sum up, President Trump had many, many chances to voluntarily comply with FBI and DOJ's request. Instead, he made the choice to keep these highly classified defense and national security documents, apparently because he wanted a souvenir. I find myself in the strange position of agreeing with former Attorney General Bill Barr's statement that Trump brought this on himself, and I would add that it's absurd that House Republicans are attacking the FBI and DOJ for doing their job and ensuring that no person is above the law. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes.
I think the whether or not they are buying information about our fellow Americans, and the answer is, well, we'll just have to get back to you on that. It sounds really complicated, but I have other questions. I'm sitting here with my father. I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows and my ability to forever hold a grudge, that you will regret not following my direction. I am sitting here waiting for the call with my father. Sounds like a shakedown, doesn't it, Director?
I'm not going to get into commenting on that.
You seem deeply uncurious about it, don't you? Almost suspiciously uncurious. Are you protecting the Bidens?
Absolutely not. The FBI
Well, you
does
won't
not
answer
and
the
has
question.
no
Hold on.
interest in
You won't answer the
protecting
question
anyone
about whether or not
politically.
that's a shakedown, and everybody knows why you won't answer it. Because to the millions of people who will see this, they know it is. And your inability to acknowledge that is deeply revealing about you. But let's go from the uncurious to the downright nosy. How many illegal FISA queries have occurred under your leadership of the FBI?
Well, there are reports that have come out with different numbers about compliance incidents.
More than 1 million illegal ones? Because that's what the Inspector General said. The Inspector General said that in the 3.4 million of these queries, more than 1 million were in error. Do you have any basis to disagree with that assessment by the Inspector General?
I'm not sure actually that's a correct characterization of the Inspector General's findings on that.
The internet will remind you of
but
that in moments. But let's now go to what the court said. The court said it was over 200,000 that have occurred on your watch. Do you have any basis to disagree with that assessment?
Again, I don't have the numbers as I sit here right now. What I can
Seems
tell
like
you,
a number you should know. How many times the FBI is breaking the law under your watch, especially if it's like over 1 million, to not know that number? And I'm worried about your veracity on the subject as well. Play the video.
Letters for
you going to the
investigation
FISA
of
court?
the Capitol.
Or you
I don't
going to-
believe FISA is remotely implicated in our investigation.
So there, Senator Lee's asking you whether or not FISA was in any way involved in your January 6th investigation, and you say no. Was that truthful?
I said that I did not believe it was.
Okay, so now let's pull up what the court said, which was something a little different than what you said. So here, nope, that's not the right one. Yeah, here we go. Right there, it says, the government has reported additional significant violations of the querying standard, including several relating to the January 6, 2021 breach of the Capitol. So I guess the question, Director Wray, is did you not know when you were answering these questions that the FBI was engaging in these illegal searches, or did you perjure yourself to Senator Lee?
I certainly didn't perjure myself. At the time that I testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I didn't have that piece of information. I will add...
Well, that was a court order. You didn't have that piece of information because the court hadn't yet rendered a judgment. Did you not know when you gave the untruthful answer before Senator Lee that this was going on?
It was a truthful answer. I did not believe FISA had been involved in the January 6th
But it was.
investigation.
So you didn't, the answer is the FBI has broken so bad that people can go and engage in queries that when you come before the Congress to answer questions, you're like blissfully ignorant. You're blissfully ignorant as to the unlawful queries. You're blissfully ignorant as to the Biden shakedown regime. And it just seems like it gets into a kind of a creepy place as well. Go to our next image on what the court said. Like, just so the American people realize, the court has smacked you down ruling FBI personnel apparently conducted queries for improper personal reasons. People were looking themselves up. They were looking their ex-lovers up. Who has been held accountable or fired as a consequence of the FBI using the FISA process as their like creepy personal snoop machine?
There have been instances in which individuals have had disciplinary action and who
Name
are no
them.
longer with it. I can't get into it here, but we can follow back up
But
with
don't
you.
you see that that's kind of the thing, Director Wray, that you preside over the FBI that has the lowest level of trust in the FBI's history. People trusted the FBI more when J. Edgar Hoover was running the place than when you are. And the reason is because you don't give straight answers. You give answers that later a court deems aren't true. And then at the end of the day, you won't criticize an obvious shakedown when it's directly in front of us. And it appears as though you're whitewashing the conduct of corrupt people.
Respectfully, Congressman, in your home state of Florida, the number of people applying to come work for us and devote their lives working for us is up over 100%.
We're deeply proud of them, and they deserve better than you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Director Wray. I thank you for continuing to serve with all of these attempts to sully your name.
I want to pick up where Mr. Buck began as well by thanking you for your service, and I'm glad that we have an opportunity for one Democrat, one Republican in close succession to thank you for your service to the country. You are being attacked and vilified by some of the members of this committee and others outside this committee because the Justice Department and the FBI has had the audacity to investigate serious allegations of criminal conduct by a former president. And I just want a chance to recap how we got to where we are. During the last administration, and for 4 years, the Justice Department took the position, not unprecedented for the department, that a current president could not be indicted. Now, I think that's a flawed matter as a constitutional principle, but nonetheless, that was the view of the Office of Legal Counsel and the Justice Department during the Trump years, that the President of the United States could not be indicted. My Republican colleagues seem to believe that a former president similarly cannot be indicted. That would effectively make a president above the law, beyond the reach of the law. And in my view, there would probably only one thing the founders would find more politically precarious and dangerous to our Constitution than the indictment of a president or former president, and that is the failure to indict a president or former president when they have engaged in criminal conduct. The Justice Department, I believe, as Representative Lofgren, my fellow member of the January 6th committee, asserted, took a very long time to begin the investigation of Donald Trump and his involvement in January 6th. I believe it began with urgency when it came to the foot soldiers who broke into the Capitol and assaulted police officers that day. But at least what I can tell from the public record, the activities of the president himself, some of which were a matter of very much a public record, such as his tape-recorded conversation with the Secretary of State in Georgia, in which he badgered the secretary to, quote, find 11,780 votes that don't exist. While that was the subject of investigation by the local district attorney in Fulton County, did not appear to be the subject of investigation for more than a year by the Justice Department. To me, that is inexplicable. This was never the kind of case in which you could roll up the foot soldiers on the higher-ups because there were multiple lines of effort in this plot to overturn the election. I do think that the appointment of the special counsel has accelerated the investigation of the former president's misconduct, and I think that is a positive step for the department and for the country so we can get resolution to this. But likewise, with Mar-a-Lago, notwithstanding the protests of my colleagues, there were repeated requests by the archives to get those documents back from the former president. And then when those were unsuccessful, there was a grand jury subpoena that was administered. And when that was unsuccessful, and only when that was unsuccessful, and there was evidence that the former president was still withholding highly classified materials, did the FBI go to this step of a search warrant. That was more than a year and a half after those initial requests. This was anything but a rush to judgment in the Mar-a-Lago case. So I believe the department, if anything, has exercised enormous caution, I would say too much caution, in the January 6th committee's work and oversight to proceed against a former president when there are serious and credible allegations of criminal conduct. But I want to thank you for your stewardship during this incredibly difficult time. I don't think there's been a more difficult time for an FBI director. And notwithstanding concerns I have expressed, none of them go to your integrity or your commitment to the country, and I want to thank you for that. Let me ask you about a different topic, although related to January 6th as well. But let me ask you broadly about domestic violent extremism. I offered an amendment in this committee, voted down by the Republicans, that we should oversee the increasingly dire threat of domestic violent extremism. One of your recent reports underscored the rise of this prevalent threat, and I'd ask you if you would address it today.
So the rise of domestic violent extremism is something that I and we have been identifying for quite some time. It goes back well before January 6th. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but the Joint Terrorism Task Forces that we hear about so often at the FBI were largely created in response to domestic terrorism, not foreign terrorism. But in my first few years as director, we were identifying this issue more and more, and that's why we elevated in the summer of 2019 racially motivated violent extremism to a national threat priority level. And we saw, I think, about a 40% increase in the number of domestic violent extremism investigations all before anything to do with January 6th. Obviously, since then, it has continued. But domestic violent extremism cuts across the spectrum from the racially motivated violent extremism, militia violent extremism, anarchist violent extremism, environmental violent extremism, and of course, recently, we've had a lot of violent extremism attacks against pro-life facilities, and we're investigating those. So it really covers a wide spectrum, and what they all have in common is three things: violence or threats of violence, motivated by some ideology, and it varies, in violation of federal criminal law. And that's the domestic violent extremism that I'm talking about when I've identified this phenomenon.
Mr. Chairman, could I request unanimous consent to enter into the record two letters, both from David Weiss, the Trump-appointed U.S. Attorney in Delaware, rebutting allegations concerning partiality in the investigation of the Hunter Biden case. Thank you, Director.
Without objection. Director, what's the difference between a traditional Catholic and a radical traditional Catholic?
I'm not an expert on the Catholic orders.
Well, your FBI wrote a memo talking about radical traditional Catholics. I'm just wondering if you could define it for us.
Well, what I can tell you is you're referring to the Richmond product, which was a single product by a single field office, which as soon as I found out about it, I was aghast and ordered it withdrawn and removed from FBI systems.
You were aghast, then why won't you let us talk to the people who put it together?
We are working on finishing an internal review into what happened
We have
there.
to wait, we, the Congress, and the American people have to wait until you do an internal review. It's not a criminal investigation going on here. An internal review before we can talk to the people who wrote this?
When we finish our internal review, which will be very soon, we will come back
idea how
before
many
the committee
Catholics in America?
and provide a briefing on what we found.
Well, we appreciate
And then
the
we can-
briefing, but we want to talk to the people who wrote it. Any
then
idea
we
how
can-
many Catholics there are in America, Director?
No, sir.
There's a lot, over 60 million. What percentage of those are radical traditional Catholics, according to the Richmond Field Office of the FBI?
Again, that product is not something that I will defend or excuse. It's something that I thought was appalling and removed it.
Let's read from that product, page 4 of that product. By the way, the copy you gave us, when can we get a copy that didn't have all these redactions on it so we can actually see what the American taxpayers were paying for to see their rights, their First Amendment religious liberty rights attacked? Let me just read from page 4. Provide new opportunities to mitigate extremist threat through outreach to traditional Catholic parishes and the development of sources with the placement and access to report on places of worship. That's pretty fancy language for they're trying to put informants in the parish, in the church. That's what this memorandum said, Director, from one of your field offices. And you won't let us talk to the people who did it. Any response to that?
I didn't know. I was waiting for the question.
No, do you think priests should be informants inside the church, Director?
We do not recruit, open, or operate confidential human sources to infiltrate, target, report
But that's not
on
what this,
religious
that's not what this
organizations.
said. It sounds like you were trying to do it in Richmond, Virginia.
No, sir. No, sir.
You weren't? This didn't happen? You can assure us that this didn't happen?
That product did not, to as best as we can tell, result in any investigative action as a result of it. None.
You know what the motivation for this was? Why would they even think about doing this? You know what the motivation was?
Well, again, I think that's what our internal review will find, and I'd rather wait until I hear what the results of that internal
Well, I don't need an
review are.
internal review. I can read the document. I assume you can do the same, because it says right there on the same page. Richmond assesses extremist interest in radical traditional Catholics is likely to increase over the next 12 to 24 months in the run-up to the next general election. Same paragraph. Events in which extremists and radical traditional Catholics might have common cause include legislation, judicial decisions in such areas as abortion rights, immigration, affirmative action, and LGBTQ protections. It's politics. That's the motivation. In the run-up to the next election, and they talk about the border, affirmative action, and abortion rights, it's total politics. I mean, I think it's interesting that we just got a decision from a bunch of Catholics who sit on the United States Supreme Court relative to affirmative action. Politics was the total motivation here, and that's what's scary. That's what's, I think, so frightening, and how this happens, I don't know. And 5 people signed off on it. 5 people, including the Chief Division Counsel at the Richmond Field Office. I'd like to talk to this lawyer. And a lot of people in this room went to law school, get a course on the Constitution, talks about the First Amendment. I find that really scary. Again, when do you think we're going to have a chance? How soon are you going to complete this internal investigation so we can talk to these folks who put this together?
I expect us to be able to brief the committee on our internal review later this summer.
Will that briefing include the names of the individuals who put this document together attacking Americans' First Amendment liberty?
I'm not sure yet what it'll include because it's not done yet, but when it is, we'll provide you with an appropriate briefing.
What are you doing to fix it so this doesn't happen again?
Well, we've already started putting in place a number of fixes, and those will be further informed by the results of the review.
What are those fixes? More training, more things, more. That's the same thing you told us on FISA. And while you may have some improvement, you still got 204,000 times the database was illegally searched. So what are the training and procedures you're putting in place?
Well, I'll put the FISA stuff to the side.
I'm just
if we have
using
time,
that
I
as an
can
example
engage
of where
on
you've
that.
told us the same thing, you fixed something and you haven't.
I do not believe the number that you just invoked on the FISA side is since the reforms, the fixes, as you called them.
Can we get an unredacted-
Those post-date the numbers that you're referring to.
Director, can we get an unredacted copy while you're still doing this internal investigation? Can we at least get an unredacted copy of this memorandum?
I will find out if there's more of the document that can be shared with you. We've tried to be very careful in what we redact, and there's always a basis for it. So let me go back and see if there's more that we can provide. But I know my instructions are to be as sparing as possible in the redactions that we provide.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Director, I think it's quite rich that the guy that has accused you of lawlessness and weaponization is 400 days into violation of his own congressional subpoena over January 6th. Quite rich to me that you're hearing all of these allegations from somebody who won't even respond to a lawful subpoena. But I want to talk more about your workforce because that's where you started. A couple weeks ago at the Bureau, you had Family Day. Can you tell us what Family Day is?
Family Day is an opportunity for employees from really all over the FBI. It tends to be primarily from the nearby geographies because of the trip that they have to make to employees to bring their families into FBI headquarters so that they can see a little bit about the place their loved ones work and why mom or dad is spending so much time away from home.
You see any little kids at Family Day?
Many, many, many. It's an opportunity for us to say thank you to the families. We talk a lot in law enforcement about sacrifice, but the reality is that law enforcement officers and professionals are sacrificing to do what they love. Our families are sacrificing because of who they love.
And what would you say, in your experience, is the number one worry of a little kid about a mom or dad who is a special agent out in the field?
Obviously, they're worried that their mom or dad won't come home at night because they've been killed. And that, in fact, has happened, unfortunately, all
Happened in
too
Fort
often.
Lauderdale a couple years ago, is that right?
Laura Schwarzenberger and Dan Alphen, two of our agents killed in a connection with a child exploitation case down there. It was the single darkest day I've had in this job.
I want to turn your attention to an organization called Marco Polo. It's run by a former Trump aide named Garrett Ziegler. Over the past couple weeks, he has doxed the addresses of a former special agent connected to the Hunter Biden case. He has put up the dates of births and pictures of two current special agents who work for you. He has said the name, which I will not say, of an assistant U.S. attorney who worked in the Hunter Biden case, that she will answer for her crimes. He will focus everything on her. Justice will be done. It's out of my hands, but she will answer. Do these types of threats and doxing concern you about threats to your workforce and what it could mean?
Well, obviously, what we're most concerned about are the actual acts of violence, which themselves have happened, and as we just discussed. But this kind of phenomenon, doxing, is itself hugely problematic because the more information, personalized information about law enforcement professionals that are out in the internet, the more people who may be unstable or inclined to violence there are out there who can choose to act on it. And we're seeing that all too often. The number of officers across law enforcement killed in the line of duty has been up alarmingly over the last few years. And I know that because one of the things I committed to doing early in my tenure was every time an officer anywhere in the country is shot and killed in the line of duty, I was going to personally call that sheriff or that chief, and on behalf of the FBI, express our support and condolences and relay that to the family. And I have done that now close to 400 times since I've been in this job.
Thank you for doing that. And you don't only do that, you send your SACs, your special agents in charge, to their funerals as well, and I've seen that. Chairman, I've counted in this hearing, and we're only about an hour and a half in, the use of the word laptop about 20 times. In fact, in the chairman's opening statement, he said that he's upset that he believes the FBI prevented more Americans from learning about a private citizen's laptop. That is bananas to me. You all are bringing up FISA every single question. You're essentially saying to the American people that you're guardians of personal security and privacy, but the 2020 election was determined
Gentleman, yield.
because the FBI didn't let more Americans see a private citizen's non-consensual nudes? Is that what we're saying here? That you lost the election not because of your ideas, but because a private citizen's laptop
Do you want an answer? Will you
wasn't
yield?
out there?
Will you yield?
That's bananas. Like,
you-
you should be a party of ideas, not a party of non-consensual nudes to help you win an election.
Will you
And
yield for an
It seems
answer?
like that is what the objection is here today. We should be talking about the mass shootings that occurred over the last 10 days.
time
Instead,
of the-
this hearing has turned into absolute chaos. And I yield back.
Time of the gentleman's expired.
Is responsible for helping to ensure the rule of law. Unfortunately, this chairman ignored a bipartisan congressional subpoena served upon him. The actions of this chairman have undermined the credibility of all congressional committees in seeking information from witnesses and have undermined the rule of law. Now, Director Wray, thank you for your public service and for the service of the brave FBI agents. I'm going to ask you a series of basic questions to get facts out to the American people about our system of justice. Trump advisor Roger Stone was convicted in a federal court, correct?
That's my recollection.
Trump donor Elliot Brady was convicted in a federal court, correct?
Also my recollection.
The Attorney General at the time for those two convictions was Bill Barr. Which president nominated Bill Barr for Attorney General?
President Trump.
Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, was convicted on two separate occasions in a federal court, correct?
I believe that's correct.
The Attorney General at the time for Cohen's second conviction was Matthew Whitaker. Which president appointed Matthew Whitaker as acting Attorney General?
President Trump.
Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, was convicted in a federal court, correct?
Yes.
Trump's former deputy campaign manager, Mr. Gates, was convicted in a federal court, correct?
That's my recollection.
Trump's campaign foreign policy advisor, George Papadopoulos, was convicted in a federal court, correct?
Yes, I think he pled guilty, yes.
The Attorney General at the time of those three cases was Jeff Sessions. Which president nominated Jeff Sessions for Attorney General?
President Trump.
You were the FBI director for all of those cases at the time. Which president nominated you?
President Trump.
Okay. What these facts show is we don't have a two-tiered system of justice. We have one Department of Justice that goes after criminals regardless of party ideology. All of these folks were convicted under the administrations of three separate Republican attorneys general. It is not the fault of the FBI that Donald Trump surrounded himself with criminals. Donald Trump brought that upon himself. Thank you to the FBI for exposing the cesspool of corruption of these Trump associates. Now, I'd like to talk about efforts by MAGA Republicans to defund the FBI. I think it'd be useful for the FBI to explain to American people what your missions are and how critical they are. So, again, a series of basic questions. The FBI's mission includes counterterrorism, correct?
Yes.
And that means the FBI works to stop terrorist attacks on American soil, right?
Yes.
Okay. The FBI's mission also includes counterintelligence, correct?
Yes.
And that means the FBI works to stop espionage of American companies and organizations. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. The FBI's mission includes stopping cybercrime, right?
Correct.
The FBI's mission includes stopping public corruption, right?
Correct.
The FBI's mission includes stopping weapons of mass destruction from being detonated on American soil, right?
Yes, we work with others on it, but yes.
The FBI's mission includes going after organized crime, right?
Yes.
You go after violent crime, correct?
Yes.
You also go after white-collar crime, right?
Yes.
The FBI's mission also includes going after child sex trafficking, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Particular for the work that you've done on gun violence and as well the work that you've done in keeping Americans safe. Let me very quickly move on some issues that have been made a chief part of the work of our friends on the other side of the aisle. Republican members of this committee have spent much time of this Congress claiming that various aspects of the U.S. government have been weaponized against the American people. Director Wray, Are you or your staff or auxiliaries weaponizing the FBI against the American people?
Absolutely not.
Thank you very much. Let me thank you as well for your civil rights work and emphasize that in addition, there have been representations that the FBI exaggerates domestic terrorism reports or data. Certainly, January 6th had its many different storytellers, but that was an act of domestic terrorism. I don't know how you could have exaggerated that as evidenced by the special congressional committee we had. But let's just think of domestic terrorism as it relates to the good men and women of our law enforcement. Take an example in February 2020 in Texas, where a white supremacist was engaged in conspiracy involving swatting, a harassment tactic, and all of the emergency services showed up over and over again. Does domestic terrorism impact negatively and dangerously on America's law enforcement and first responders?
Absolutely, and sometimes law enforcement are themselves the intended victims or targets of domestic violent extremism.
Though you have good, committed individuals, does the critique is legitimate? That's our job. But does the constant condemnation impact on morale of FBI personnel or those trying to join the FBI?
Well, look, our people are human beings, and nobody likes to see the organization they've dedicated their careers, really their lives to, unfairly criticized. But I will tell you, as I said in my opening statement, that the good news is our people are also tough and resilient. Our attrition is in the low single digits and would be the envy of almost any employer, and our recruiting, unlike what's happening in law enforcement more generally, is actually up very significantly.
Thank you, and I look forward to it being diverse. Let me start with our whistleblower journey here. Are you familiar with FBI Special Agents Kyle Serapin?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name.
Yeah. The committee heard testimony that Mr. Serapin was suspended after he mishandled his service weapon and then said he wanted to use 2 female FBI executives as shooting targets. That was testimony of Jennifer Moore, HR under Human Resources under oath from the FBI. Mr. Serapin describes himself as a congressional whistleblower, but committee Republicans will not tell us whether he has been in contact with them. Are you familiar with former FBI agents Garrett O'Boyle and Marcus Allen?
Again, I'm familiar with the names.
Thank you. O'Boyle was suspended for accessing information about an ongoing case and then leaking to the press, and Allen was suspended for interfering in the investigation of a January 6th suspect. Both Allen and O'Boyle testified before the Weaponization Committee in May. Were you aware of that?
Yes, ma'am.
I think they are clearly there for all friends and family to see. I assume they wanted to be seen. Do you know who Kash Patel is, if you know?
Yes, I know who he is.
He's an aide to President Trump, isn't he? Or was an aide, or is an aide to President Trump?
Well, he was an individual who served in a number of different roles, both up here on the Hill and in the executive branch.
Thank you. Here's another picture. It's the checks that Serapin sent to both O'Boyle and Allen. Each check was for $255,194. Let me say that again. These men were paid $255,194 after they testified as so-called whistleblowers. And it should be noted that it says here, as it says, for holding the line. Director, at the time that Serapin and Patel gave Garrett O'Boyle and Marcus Allen these checks, do you happen to know if they were still employees of the FBI?
I can't speak to that. I don't know the answer.
If they were, 5 CFR 2635, and I'd appreciate if we could get an answer in writing after you go back, whether they were or not, prohibits FBI employees from accepting cash gifts, doesn't it?
Well, there are a whole number of rules that would apply to this. Again, I don't want to weigh in on a specific person.
But if they were, that rule applies about cash gifts.
I'm not aware of a situation in which they could appropriately accept cash gifts.
Just generally, if that applies to FBI agents about not taking cash gifts, is that correct?
There are definitely rules that apply to special agents accepting cash gifts.
Let me just finish this. Can you explain why an FBI agent should not receive cash? But let me move to one that I think is extremely important. Mr. Chairman, just a moment. And here is what I think is most interesting piece of this whole puzzle. O'Boyle and Allen are represented by an outfit called Empower Oversight.
Time's
Empower
expired.
Oversight is run by former Republican staffers. Do you know who else Empower Oversight might represent
I
in
do
any
not.
way?
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Let me just
Gentlelady's time's
conclude.
expired.
Thank you so very much.
Respond.
Thank you. The so-called IRS whistleblower who Jim Jordan had relied upon. But does anyone need any further proof that these allegations are ginned up, corrupt political stunts advanced by those who don't want to see us follow the law? Finally, Mr. Chairman, here's another person who wants to join you on the 702, but the FBI has begun major reforms, and I think we should recognize that. You've been very kind. I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. I would just point out, my guess is they got the money because they wanted the money because they were trying to feed their family.
They actually haven't received the money. I have unanimous consent request, Mr. Chairman, of a tweet Matthew Foldy put out here during this hearing. Right off the bat, Jerry Nadler lies about whistleblower getting $250,000. He says here, Marcus Allen has not received $250,000. He has not received or cashed the check that Kyle Seraphin posted online. Enter that in the record.
Into the record, the committee will take a 5-minute recess, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, and then we'll come back.